Okay, we're going to take a quick look at illumination baking now, which can be very powerful, especially when you're trying to create realistic looking scenes. One thing I'm going to do is just kind of scoot back here, and I've loaded in one of the preset skies. Just go to Atmosphere, Load Atmosphere, and under Daytime Basic, I have gold and yellow loaded in. And what I'm going to do is just create a simple scene. Nothing too spectacular, just something simple to demonstrate this effect. And actually what I'll load in something a little more complex. So I'm going to File and Load Object and just use one of the presets that are already loaded into View, and we can use an airplane. Let's just go ahead and use the Lancaster. And I'm just going to scale that up just a bit. And now right now we just have the standard light model on. Now this is a much more complex object, so it is going to take a little bit longer to render. But you'll still be able to get an idea overall of how a real object would work in here. So what I'm going to do is actually go up to our atmosphere editor, and under light we want to select global illumination. Now when we turn on global illumination, it's going to use the sky and the ground to light the ambient parts of our object. So in other words, more of the shaded parts, and also the ground, it is affecting the color. And we can see that as we move across and it renders through the preview, we can see the lighting changes. Well, now typically, if we were to use global illumination, we would have to render every single frame with it on. But what we can actually do is bake in other words, render an image map to map onto this object of that effect already on the object. And that way we can turn it back to the standard model and actually render quicker. So if we just right mouse click and select Bake to Polygons. And the reason we are baking these to polygons is because we cannot bake an global illumination onto an object without actually using a polygonal object. So I'm going to select Bake to Polygons, and now we can select the number of polygons we actually want out of this object. And I'm just going to set it to about mid-range right now and click OK. If we needed to, we could go a little bit higher next time. And now we will double click on the object, and under illumination baking, so you can see here, we can allow automatic baking for animations, force double-sided baking, depending on the type of object we have. That would be good for a plane. And then we can change the quality of the actual the map that we're creating, the image map for baking. And then we just select Bake Now, and what it'll actually do is start building that mesh and baking the mesh, which can take quite a long time depending on the actual size of the file and how complex it is. So be prepared for very long wait times. It could take a couple of hours sometimes to actually bake this correctly. Now with the mesh illumination baked, what we can actually do is render an animation. And now typically this works better with static objects and not moving ones, really depending if it's moving through an environment. Right now it would just be moving over the ground plane. But because this is baked, it's actually the animation will render much quicker. And what we can go to is our atmosphere editor and change this back to standard light and click OK. And now our plane should stay about the same as it was, but the ground is going to change. And if we take a look and actually render our illumination baked object, it doesn't look like it's actually showing up. And it doesn't look quite smooth enough. So if we go back and just turn that on really quick, we should be able to see that effect taking place. And it's actually speeding up the renderer. There we go. We can just turn that back. And if we render it, we'll see that our image map is now laid back on. So that's an easy way to tell if it's on or off, is by switching back and forth between the standard model and the other one. So you can see the differences between the previous object and the current one. And as we can see, we have some major display errors here with the rendering of that illumination object, but that is because we rendered it at a very low quality. And actually what I did was I went back and changed our settings down to the lowest just to have that rendered a lot quicker, because otherwise it could take, like I said, several hours to actually go and render a higher quality model. So the higher you raise that, the longer it will take the render, but the better quality your model will look. And if you need to see what your model looked like before you baked it, just to make sure the quality is the same, all you have to do is switch back to the standard lighting model, and that way that image map won't take effect anymore on that object. But once that object is illumination baked, that couple of hours can really come in handy and cut down your rendering time. Because if a frame would normally take 1 hour to render each frame, but if you illumination bake for only 2 hours and then render and the frame are down to 5 minutes per frame, then you've definitely speeded up your render process if you're having any sort of animation at all. So it's definitely something you only want to use for animation. If you're going to be doing stills, it's not really necessary.